what I thought was supposed to be my ticket to freedom actually has now become my ball and chain.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the HighLevel Spotlight Sessions, where we showcase awesome marketers doing awesome marketing. Today, I'm joined by Robert Patin. He's the founder of Patin Associates, which is a business management and consultancy firm for agencies. They've been doing their thing for over a decade. They've worked with dozens of agencies in the space. Robert, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Robert, I'm excited to talk to you about something we don't typically talk a lot about. We talk a lot of tactics and strategies, and we can get to that. But when I was, researching you guys, I came across first of all, you're an author. You've got a best-selling book, and I came across a review of it that really struck me. And I thought, wow, let's talk about that. And I'd love to just read the review real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The book is called The Agency Blueprint. I think it's pretty famous in the space these days. And the review says this: "This is one of those unique books that doesn't just teach you how to make your company a success, but essentially how to make your ideal lifestyle a reality and ultimately find happiness." That's pretty heavy, right? I think, talk to me about that. Like, what does that even mean? And how did you get in a business of helping people find happiness?
I think that the reference that she's making, and remembering the review since you actually highlighted it to me, I think the reference that she's making is more about business happiness and how to be able to take a look at your life and actually recognize I'm in control of what I'm doing every day. And you need to have a recognition of being able to formulate what you want your life to look like. In the book, I talk in a good amount of length about my own journey. And if you're okay, I'd like to share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Please do.
So in entrepreneurship and business ownership, I had that sort of mindset that I think a lot of Americans do, and that we needed to sacrifice our own personal lives for our careers. And that in order to be an entrepreneur and a business owner, it meant that I needed to work 80-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, and that was going to be my norm. After a while, obviously that sort of mindset isn't sustainable. And I got into that feeling like I was a hamster on a wheel, and I was just working countless hours. I was missing key moments of my family's lives, my own life, and I hated it. And at one point I decided, what have I done? I've created this thing that now what I thought was supposed to be my ticket to freedom actually has now become my ball and chain. And I feel like I'm being pulled down by it. So at that point in my life, I went back to think about, do I want to get rid of this? Do I not want to do this anymore? What should I be going about doing to be able to change my life? So I literally just took a notebook, sat in a hammock for a weekend, and just wrote out exactly what I wanted. What I wanted my life, my personal life to look like, what I wanted my business to look like, what I wanted everything to be. And then started charting out a plan of how to enact that within my business, and also things in my personal life that I needed to change as well. So it's just looking at your life in how to be able to make sort of small changes, and actually just looking at it in that you're truly in control of it. And that if I want to change something and I'm unhappy, I'm the one responsible. There's no one else to blame but me.
Yeah, I love personal responsibility. That can be really freeing. Let me ask you a question. I'm curious. When you started thinking about these things, have you ever traveled outside of the US, and did that change your perspective?
Yes, I have spent a lot of time traveling out of the US. I'm sure that I can't say that there was a specific moment in time that changed my perspective, but I travel, well, pre-pandemic, I traveled typically 3 to 6 months out of the year. I spent many months living in Barcelona, many months living in London, in Paris, in the South Pacific, in Thailand. So I love to travel, and I would say I'm a total travel addict.
Can you talk about illustrate some of the differences in culture that you come across when you do travel to some of those countries when we talk about work-life balance?
Yeah, I would say the one that's most stark is probably Parisian life and the French. They are very much about enjoying life and being in, even going to a nice Michelin star restaurant in France. One of my experiences, I was there for 7 hours, and I'm like, 7-hour meal? That's wild and completely unheard of. And how do you have time for something like that, right? Taking multiple hour lunches in the middle of the day and thinking about, it's the mindset that your work is a way and a vehicle of being able to provide you with the life, and not that your life is a vehicle to provide work, and
Mm.
it's that mind shift change that is just so incredibly important. And I mean, I know that the French are sort of given the made fun of a little bit for it, and it's definitely, I mean, I think it's freeing and I think it's great, and I'm definitely more on the side of the French than I am with American culture.
It's amazing how real the guilt is, right? I mean, I live a couple of blocks from the beach. And one day I was thinking, you know what? Like the cell service here is so good. I could tether my laptop and I could work from the beach. Like I should do that one day. I should just go down to the beach and sit in a chair and work from there. And then this like guilt came in the back of my head and it was like, oh, if anybody found out that's what you were doing, like that would be weird. And I'm like, what? Like I'm having this internal struggle. Like, why do we have this guilt in our culture, in the US culture, I should say, that makes us feel that way? And have you sort of explored that?
The thing that I think that's interesting about it is I think that it's a perception, right? Our own perception of what we think we're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't know that I can necessarily answer for you and why you felt that way specifically. I mean, for me, I mean, I don't live that close to the beach anymore. I've more moved back to where I grew up. But when I was living a couple of blocks from the beach, I never went. Like I only time I
Right?
ever went was when someone would come to visit, and it's like, I have this beautiful beach blocks away from my house. I should go on walks there. I should, exactly the same way that you're saying, I should go work from there. um I mean, I think that what we end up experiencing, right, is that we are trying to consistently build this life that we think that is going to take all of this incredible amounts of work to be able to get there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
actually, we are over orchestrating so much, and working with clients on a regular basis and going through and dissecting their businesses and how to help them create that life, is that so much of the business is you're piling on so many things into it, trying to figure out how to solve so many problems without actually looking at, hey, what is the end goal? How can I simplify everything, even in your personal life, right? And if you
Mm.
look at things in a little more simple minded sort of way, it allows for things to be a lot easier, and maybe to pull yourself out of that mindset.
Well, one thing I think would really help, and I wonder if this is part of your program, is talking to other people who have made the transition, seeing real life examples of like, oh, wow, this is not some crazy foreign idea. These people are still successful. They've gotten through that barrier of sort of guilt or whatever it is. And now, and going to different cultures, like you said, can do that as well, help you sort of realize like, wait, this doesn't have to be this way. Do you have a pretty cool network of people now that like you could look around and be like, oh wow, there is another way?
Uh, that's actually being formulated at the moment. So I'm actually in the process of building a community of all of my agency clients to actually allow them to learn from
Nice.
each other on a daily basis. I mean, there's some instances, right? I'm not the creative agency owner myself, even though I've managed agencies and have worked internally at them. There's some insights that other agency owners can provide that I just can't. So
Hmm.
opening up the community for all my clients, former clients, and current clients to be able to provide value to each other, and creating a mastermind group as well that allows for an agency to actually be center stage with a lot of other agency owners, helping them solve their problems in real time.
That's super cool. Okay, so talk to me about, I've made the mindset shift. I'm like, all right, I've seen the light. There is a better way. I want to make a change here. I come to you. Typically speaking, how much operational improvement, optimization needs to be done to actually make it a reality?
I mean, that's kind of a hard question to answer, right? Because there's so many agencies are at many different stages depending on what they're actually doing. Um,
Sure.
so I think that when you look at your business, you're like, hey, this is where I'm at and this is where I want it to be. And it feels like this extremely daunting task. And how am I going to accomplish it? It feels like, sometimes can feel like a futile effort. And I know for me, I personally felt that way starting out. It's just, how am I going to get from here all the way to here, from 100-hour weeks to 3 days a week? That just doesn't seem possible.
Mm-hmm.
I The analogy I like to use for this is, think about it in a road trip, right? You're the way that you actually build your business and actually get to that end destination is, you've got this 3-day long road trip that you're going to be going on. You clearly have pit stops that you have planned and unplanned. You're going to end up maybe going on a random detour to go
Mm-hmm.
stop by the beach along the way of wherever you're going. but the end destination is still that end site, and actually breaking it down. So you've got restroom breaks, food breaks, all of these different breaks that you have along the way, and actually look at them in these sort of sprints of what you're currently working on. So whether that be a quarterly sprint, is currently the way that I'm working with clients, is that you have 90 days where we focus on one thing, that
Mm.
we work on actually creating momentum around that specific item, create a process around it, allow for the owners and executives to be able to solve that problem, and then actually allow the team to take on that process from that point forward so that it actually has a life of its own. So it's just breaking it down into chunks, but there's tons of operational changes that I think are foundational to lots of agencies. And as I mentioned before, it's actually deconstructing the way that the agency is functioning, allowing for it to really be as efficient as possible.
Do you guys look across everything, right? You look at like, okay, let's talk about financial structure. You talk about organizational structure. You talk about, is there usually one that's the major bottleneck, or is it always different?
I think it all feeds into each other. I mean, that's the thing I love about finance and why I have been able to, and sort of how I gravitated to what I'm doing now, is that, and the core of who I am is a problem solver. I love being handed a challenge, and how do I think, and a super cliche, but how do I think outside the box to solve this challenge? Um, but everything touches finance. I even working internally at agencies, my mindset was finance. The operations team is the client for the finance team. So sales, the ops team, the business overall actually completely funnels through finance. And so I have a good holistic view of the entire business, how it's functioning, whether there's operational issues, project issues, everything actually goes through finance. So we actually are able to see, hey, these are areas where we see that you are going off kilter in where you are to your goal or even industry standards. Let's take a look at why that's happening and solve that specific problem. So it's going across the gamut of how you're actually delivering things to clients, making sure your client attrition is as low as it possibly can be,
Mm.
converting at higher rates, making sure you're selling at the right prices, creating structure around all of that, and how ultimately you allow for you to have middle management and even just team engagement, right? Which is so incredibly huge.
Mm.
I mean, you have the traditional agency model that's I'm going to hire someone young and I'm going to train them and then they leave. And I mean, this industry, what we sell is our team's time, and our
Mm.
team is our most valuable asset. So actually looking at it in a completely different mindset, making sure that you're truly engaging them, drawing them in, making sure that you're creating a home for them at your agency so they stay long term is so incredibly important.
That's really interesting. I can really relate to the financial side because I feel like a lot of agency entrepreneurs are really good at the skill set of like whatever it is the agency is going to focus on. And so that's their thing. And worrying about numbers and pricing and all that kind of stuff is always like a pain point. And so I can see how that could really be beneficial to have someone with experience come in and be like, the margins on that are going to kill you. And that would take you years to figure out the hard way, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if I had a picture of a client's shocked face when I told them at one point, you need to eliminate a client at 60% of your business because it's actually bleeding you dry, they
Mm,
looked at me like, you're crazy, you're
right.
absolutely insane. But what I ended up showing them and actually looking at the financials of that specific client is that for every dollar of revenue, they were spending $1.25 to execute on that business. All the other revenue was profitable except for that one client. And they thought, hey, it's our biggest client, we have to save them. So continuing to discount every time they asked for it,
Mm,
over delivering on scopes of work consistently because,
totally.
hey, I've got to keep this $2.5 million whale. Actually, it's really that chain that's dragging you down. And if you
Yeah,
had the financial information to make that determination, it's just huge.
that's fascinating. On the flip side, you mentioned sort of company culture. And it's funny because I was having an internal conversation yesterday about especially young businesses, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you're kind of figuring out as you go, it's hard to know what the future org chart should look like, right? So oftentimes, like you said, you get somebody young and talented. If you don't have the ascension sort of map pre-existing, probably you're going to lose them pretty quickly because they're going to get good at what they do and then they're going to jump to an organization that does have those next level positions planned out and priced out and all that kind of stuff, and that could be really hard if this is your first go at it, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a huge advocate of staying consistently in touch with your team. I mean, for me personally, I know every single one of my team members on a very personal level, and I may not know necessarily their work every single day because I've got middle management that's actually doing that, but I want to check in and actually get to know
Mm.
them and actually understand what their future goals are, what they're looking to accomplish in their career, maybe provide them with some continuing ed, whether that's even paying for some tuition for them to go back to school, things like that, that
Mm.
allows for them to be able to build themselves up. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for continuing ed and making sure that you're developing yourself, whether that's in your personal life or in your career. Um, and just getting to know your team on that level and being able to, hey, know that this particular individual is wanting to go from being a junior designer to eventually being a creative director one day. And how are you actually helping them do that and providing them with the support to do that? And just, I mean, the crux of it, what I even think is more important even in that specific piece, is the team camaraderie piece. I know that I ask this question all the time, and what is the number one reason someone comes to work? What is your thought on that?
The number one reason someone comes to work?
Yeah,
For their paycheck, right? Isn't that the obvious answer?
that's what everyone would assume. But realistically speaking, that's not. You can actually, and I'm not telling you and suggesting you underpay people, but that really isn't the number one reason. Number one reason someone comes to work is to be part of a team. So
Hmm.
creating that team environment and creating that culture, creating that home for someone is more important to them than the money. Number two is the acknowledgement for doing a good job. And then number three is money. And that's, statistically speaking, I can't say that's going to be everyone's feeling is
Mm-hmm.
that, but a generalization of that's typically what it is. And if you provide your team with one and two, you don't have to give them that consistent increase in pay, which sometimes for smaller agencies is difficult to be, hey, I can't afford the $250,000 creative director Manhattan wages. I
Totally.
have to pay less, right? So how do you do the flip side of that and making sure that you're providing them with other aspects of value to that team member?
Thinking about that, that rings certainly true firsthand. I mean, at the agency that I used to run, we certainly hired more than one person who actually took a pay cut from their previous position because it was more about culture. Working remotely is huge, right? If you were working in a position where you actually had to go commute, people are willing to sacrifice 10% of their salary easily to not have to make that commute anymore. And that's just a simple one. So that really rings true. Robert, let me ask you one more question. Let's loop back around here. The end result of going through this process, do you have any favorite stories of, like, a client before and where they're at now? Like, I'm envisioning simple things like, yeah, being able to work at the beach. Like, totally. I could, if I focused on that, I could make that a reality. Right. Like, and I just never really, talking to you is motivating me to, like, actually sit down and rearrange some things and make it happen. Right. I'm not going to do calls like this from the beach, but I could certainly plan around it.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that I would have a specific story because a lot of clients can be fairly transformational. The thing that I would say that has been, I would say, really meaningful to me is there was a specific client that I was in meeting with him, and he said something to me, something along the lines of, "Hey, Robert, if it wasn't for you, I probably would have lost my business. If it weren't for you, I probably would have lost my house. And if it weren't for you, I probably wouldn't have lost, I would probably would have lost my marriage." And it's being able to have that kind of impact working with people that just provides my life with meaning and just makes me so happy that I get to come to work and actually have impact like that on people's lives.
It's got to be pretty fun.
Absolutely.
Well, Robert, if people are listening and they're like, you know what, I'd like to talk a little bit more about this, where should they head? Is it creativeagencysuccess.com?
Absolutely. Just go to creativeagencysuccess.com, and up at the top, there is a link to schedule time to chat with me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. We will see you in the next one.